The day I got my first period, my father erased me from the world. Not figuratively, literally. Within hours, every window in my bedroom disappeared behind thick sheets of black plastic. Every light bulb was unscrewed. Every crack where sunlight could sneak through was sealed shut until my room became something that no 13-year-old should ever know. A tomb. And according to my father, it was exactly where I belonged. Light makes women vain. He didn't shout it. He said it the way someone might explain why rain falls or why fire burns, as if it were simply a law of nature. Once a girl becomes a woman, he'd tell anyone willing to listen, the light starts poisoning her mind. I believed him. How could I not? He was my father. He'd homeschooled me my entire life. He decided what books I read, what food I ate, what clothes I wore, what questions I was allowed to ask. When the only version of reality you've ever known comes from one person, you don't realize you're trapped. You think everyone else is. Dad had rules. Hundreds of them. No mirrors. No makeup. No jewelry. No colorful clothes. Nothing that reflected light. Even polished silverware was considered dangerous. If he caught Mom checking her reflection in a window, dinner disappeared. If she stayed in the shower longer than 3 minutes, she slept in the garage. Concrete floor. Middle of winter. No blanket. No complaints. She stopped crying years before I was old enough to understand why. He cut all our hair himself. Kitchen scissors. No comb. No measuring. Just uneven chunks falling onto the bathroom floor. You don't need to look pretty, he'd say. Pretty girls abandon their families. At church, people complimented how modest we looked. Nobody questioned why every dress we owned was the same dull shade of gray. Nobody wondered why Mom never smiled in family photos. Nobody noticed that every time Dad entered a room, the air itself seemed to stop breathing. Years later, I learned where it all came from. His mother. She left when he was 12, packed a suitcase, chased a modeling career, never looked back. That single moment hollowed him out. Instead of grieving, instead of therapy, instead of healing, he convinced himself she'd left because mirrors had corrupted her. Beauty had stolen her soul. So if beauty destroyed one woman, he'd make sure it destroyed no others, even if it meant destroying us first. The morning everything changed started with blood. I woke up freezing. The sheets beneath me were soaked crimson. My heart slammed against my ribs. I thought I was dying. I stumbled toward the hallway, trembling. Dad! He looked down, saw the blood, and smiled. Not a relieved smile. Not a comforting smile. A victorious one. Like someone who'd been waiting years for Christmas morning. It's time, he whispered. Mom froze. She already knew. She wouldn't look at me. Instead, she looked at the floor. Dad disappeared into the garage. When he came back, he carried a roll of thick black plastic. Industrial grade. Heavy. The kind used to cover broken roofs after storms. He marched upstairs without another word. I followed because, well, where else was I supposed to go? For the next 4 hours. I listened. Staple gun. Hammer. Tape ripping. Furniture scraping. Plastic stretching across glass. Every sharp metallic click echoed through the house. Each sound sealed another piece of my life away. When he finally opened my bedroom door, the sunlight was gone. Every last trace. The room wasn't dark. Darkness still has shadows. This was emptiness. I couldn't even see my own hands. Dad stepped beside me. If you can't see yourself, he said softly, you can't become obsessed with yourself. Then he reached into his pocket. He placed something cold into my palm. A flashlight. For one beautiful second, Hope exploded inside my chest. Until I clicked it. Nothing. Dead batteries. He laughed. Actually laughed. Just checking your humility. Then he shut the door. The lock clicked, and I heard his footsteps disappear. The first night, I cried until I couldn't breathe. The second, I begged. The third, I stopped asking. You adapt to impossible things. That's the terrifying part. Eventually, I memorized every inch of the room. 23 steps from bed to door. 7 to the dresser. 4 to the chair. 2 careful turns before reaching the wall. Touch became my eyesight. My fingertips replaced my eyes. I counted everything. Every step. Every corner. Every heartbeat. Then Dad started moving the furniture. Always while I slept. I'd wake up convinced I knew where the dresser stood. Take 3 confident steps. Crack. My forehead smashed into solid wood. Blood filled my mouth. Upstairs. I'd hear him laughing. Sometimes he waited outside my room just to listen. Eating became another punishment. I'd miss the plate. Drop food onto my lap. Knock over cups. Where stains I couldn't even see. At dinner he'd describe me to my brothers. Look at your sister. She eats like an animal. The boys laughed. Not because they hated me. Because they were children. Children who trusted their father. Just like I had. Weeks turned into months. Then seasons. Time disappeared. Morning and night meant nothing when every hour looked identical. The darkness swallowed birthdays. Holidays. Weather. I couldn't remember what blue looked like. I tried picturing the sky. My memories kept fading. Like photographs left in the sun. My body began changing. My legs hurt constantly. My teeth ached. Bruises never healed. My fingernails loosened. One morning, one simply fell off. No pain. Just gone. I sat on the floor holding it, wondering if pieces of me would keep disappearing until there was nothing left. Mom still brought meals. She never stayed long. But every single time, I heard it. A tiny sound. A shaky inhale. A quiet sniffle. She cried every day outside my door. Never loudly. Never enough for Dad to hear. Never enough to save me. Then, one afternoon, another bedroom went silent. My little sister Emma. She was 11. I heard footsteps. Doors opening. Staple guns. Plastic stretching. Hammering. Again. She'd gotten her first period. Dad's ritual had begun all over. That night, for the first time in months, I heard another voice in the darkness. Are you here? Emma, barely whispering. I crawled across the hallway, hands searching along the walls. Eventually, my fingers found hers. Tiny, ice cold, shaking. She squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. I'm scared. I know. Are we bad? The question hit harder than any bruise. I swallowed. No. But Dad says. I know. Silence. Then, she whispered something I'll never forget. I don't remember what sunlight feels like. She'd only been inside one day. Months passed. Our conversations became lifelines. We tapped messages through the walls, counted footsteps, invented games, shared memories before they disappeared. What color were flowers again? What did rain look like? What does your face look like now? I don't know. Neither of us did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Dad had moved the hallway table again. I didn't know. I stepped forward, tripped, missed the railing, and fell. The impact exploded through my arm. I heard the crack before I felt it. Then came the pain. White hot. Blinding. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't stand. Couldn't scream. My wrist bent at an angle wrists aren't supposed to bend. Dad stood at the top of the stairs, looking down, completely calm. We should go to the hospital, Mom pleaded. No. They'll expose her to artificial light. She broke her arm. It'll heal. It isn't healing. It will. Then he walked away. Just walked away. I wrapped the wrist myself. In total darkness. Feeling the broken bones grind together beneath my fingers. Every movement made my stomach lurch. Even today, my hand still curves the wrong way. A permanent reminder that pain doesn't always leave when the wound closes. Emma got worse. Much worse. One evening she whispered, "My tooth is loose. You're too young." I know. A week later, another. Then another. She wasn't losing baby teeth. Her adult teeth were falling out. She cried herself to sleep every night. Dad called it purification. I called it dying. Then, something happened that I never thought possible. Someone questioned him. Not Mom. Not me. My older brother. Michael. He was 16. One night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I heard a soft knock against my wall. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. I crawled toward the sound. The door cracked open just enough for a hand to slip inside. Michael's. He didn't say anything. He simply pressed something into my palm. It was smaller than my father's flashlight. Tiny enough to disappear inside my fist. A cheap keychain flashlight. I stared at it. Afraid to hope. Afraid to breathe. My thumb hovered over the button. Click. A thin beam sliced through the darkness. For the first time in 2 years, I saw light, and the very first thing it revealed made my blood run cold. The tiny beam trembled in my hand. Not because the flashlight was weak, because my fingers wouldn't stop shaking. For 2 years, I'd imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. I thought the first thing I'd see would be freedom. Instead, I saw dust. Layers of it. It coated my desk, my bed frame, the walls. Every surface looked abandoned, like nobody had lived there in years. Then I looked down. My reflection stared back from a cracked picture frame leaning against the floor. I almost didn't recognize the girl looking at me. Her hair had been hacked into uneven patches. Her skin was pale enough to disappear into the darkness. Her eyes looked older than they should. Not tired. Empty. I reached toward the glass. The girl reached back. For a second, I wondered if Dad had been right. Maybe darkness really had changed me. Then another thought hit even harder. No, the darkness hadn't changed me. It had hidden me. I spent the next hour using that tiny flashlight like it was the most precious thing in the world. I didn't waste a single second. Every corner of my room became a clue. The black plastic covering my windows wasn't ordinary construction material. It had been screwed directly into the frame. There were layers. Plastic. Plywood. More plastic. Even if I'd somehow reached the window, there was no getting through it. This room had never been meant to keep light out. It had been designed to keep me in. The realization settled over me slowly. Dad hadn't acted on impulse. He'd planned everything. Every screw. Every lock. Every speech about humility. He'd built a world where questioning him felt impossible because there was nothing else to compare it to. That was his real prison. Not the room. The story. The next night Michael came back. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. I slipped to the door. "You saw it," he whispered. "I saw enough." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For waiting this long." Silence filled the hallway. Then he said something that changed everything. "I've been looking through Dad's office." My heart stopped. "What?" "He's lying." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The condition. The rules. The reason we're living like this. It's all fake." Those words echoed inside my head long after he'd gone. Fake. Not misunderstood. Not exaggerated. Fake. Every lecture. Every restriction. Every warning. Every time Dad said the outside world couldn't understand us. He knew. He always knew. For the next week, Michael smuggled information whenever he could. Tiny notes folded into pieces of bread. Scraps hidden inside books. Whispered conversations through the hallway. Dad kept files. Dozens of them. Research papers. Medical journals. Articles printed from the internet. Not proving his beliefs. Building them. He'd highlighted symptoms. copied terminology, practiced explanations. If anyone ever questioned him, he already had an answer waiting. The deeper Michael looked, the stranger things became. There were maps, property records, letters, old photographs. Some of them dated years before I was born. One evening he handed me the smallest note yet. Only 4 words. He isn't hiding us. Another pause. Then another folded corner. He's hiding something else. I barely slept after that. If the isolation wasn't about protecting us, then what was it about? The question gnawed at me. Every conversation Dad ever had replayed inside my mind. Every warning. Every contradiction. Every excuse. Pieces started fitting together. He never cared whether neighbors saw him, only whether they spoke to us. He didn't mind visitors. He just controlled every conversation. He answered every question before we could. He made sure nobody stayed long enough to notice anything unusual. Control, not secrecy. Days later, I heard voices downstairs. Not church friends. Not neighbors. Strangers. I knelt beside the floor vent. A man spoke calmly. "So you're sure nobody has entered the west side of the property?" Dad answered immediately. "Absolutely." Another voice. "And the basement? It's been sealed for years." Basement? My stomach tightened. We didn't have a basement. At least, I'd never seen one. That night I asked Michael. His response came almost instantly. "We do." "Where?" "Behind Dad's workshop." "I've never seen it." "You weren't supposed to." The next week became a race. Michael searched the office. I searched my memories. Every strange rule suddenly felt connected to something bigger. Dad never let anyone near the workshop. Deliveries stopped outside. He carried everything inside himself. Nobody entered. Nobody questioned it. Nobody noticed. Because everyone trusted him. Then something unexpected happened. Mom knocked on my door. Not with food. Not because Dad told her to. She whispered, "Are you awake?" "Yes." There was a long silence. Then, "I'm sorry." 2 words. Barely audible. But they carried years of regret. I should have stopped this. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She continued anyway. I thought if I agreed with him, he'd eventually let everything go back to normal. Another pause. I was wrong. For the first time in years, I heard honesty instead of obedience. The following evening Michael appeared again. His breathing was fast. "We don't have much time." "What happened?" "He knows someone has been in the office." My pulse spiked. "Did he see you?" "I don't think so. But he changed the locks." He looked over his shoulder. "We leave tomorrow." I stared at him. Tomorrow? No more waiting. The plan was reckless. Dad attended the monthly church council every first Thursday. Always the same schedule. Leave at 6. Return just before 8. 90 minutes. That was all we'd have. Enough to reach the workshop. Enough to find the basement. Enough to learn what he'd been hiding. Or enough to get caught. The next evening felt endless. Every second dragged. Every creak in the house sounded louder than usual. At exactly 6 o'clock, the front door shut. Dad's truck pulled away. Michael counted to 60. Then 90. Then 120. Only then did he whisper, "Now." For the first time in years, I walked through the house with real light. The flashlight's narrow beam bounced across familiar walls that suddenly looked unfamiliar. Paint peeled in places I'd never noticed. Family photographs lined the hallway. Every single one had something strange. Mom never looked directly at the camera. Dad always stood in the center. The rest of us, positioned around him like decorations. Not family. Possessions. The workshop smelled of motor oil and old wood. Michael closed the door behind us. Help me. We pushed aside a massive steel cabinet. It barely moved. Underneath, a metal hatch, hidden perfectly beneath layers of dust. Neither of us spoke. Michael pulled. Locked. He reached into his pocket, smiled nervously. I stole the key yesterday. The lock clicked. The hatch groaned open. Cold air rushed upward. Not stale. Fresh. Someone had been down there recently. A staircase disappeared into darkness. Real darkness. Not the kind Dad forced on us. The kind that protects secrets. Michael looked at me. You ready? I swallowed. No. He nodded. Me neither. Together, we started down the stairs. Each step echoed louder than the last. Then, the flashlight beam landed on something impossible. Rows and rows of filing cabinets, computers, shelves stacked with boxes, maps pinned across the walls, newspaper clippings, photographs, dozens of them, none of our family. Every picture showed strangers, different towns, different houses, different names. What is this? I whispered. Michael didn't answer. He couldn't, because he was staring at one photograph hanging alone on the far wall. A smiling woman, modeling on a magazine cover. Beautiful, confident, free. Across the image, someone had written one sentence in thick black marker. She started it, and in that instant, we realized our family had never been the real target. We were only living inside someone else's unfinished war. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. The flashlight trembled across the photograph. The smiling woman looked impossibly alive, frozen in a magazine cover that had yellowed with age. Underneath the frame sat dozens of newspaper clippings. Some had dates from 30 years ago. Others were much newer. Every headline mentioned disappearances. Runaways. Families torn apart. Missing inheritances. Missing people. My pulse hammered in my ears. Michael slowly reached toward the nearest filing cabinet. He pulled the drawer open. Inside, everything was organized alphabetically. Names, addresses, photographs, detailed notes. It wasn't random. Someone had spent decades building this archive. Dad hadn't been hiding from the world. He'd been studying it. Look at this, Michael whispered. He held up an old property deed. The address wasn't ours. It belonged to an abandoned farmhouse nearly 50 miles away. Attached to it was a handwritten note. Possible location of original documents. Original documents? Another folder contained maps covered in red circles, each location connected by neat black lines. Another held photographs of old church records. Another contained copies of wills and inheritance papers. The deeper we searched, the stranger it became. Then I noticed a small wooden box sitting alone on the shelf. Unlike everything else, it wasn't labeled. I lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of old letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. The first one began simply. To my son. Michael looked over my shoulder. Neither of us spoke as I unfolded the brittle paper. It wasn't from Dad. It was from his mother. The letter wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a goodbye. It explained why she'd left. She hadn't abandoned her family to become famous. She had fled because she'd uncovered a criminal scheme involving forged property records inside the town. Several influential people had been stealing land from families who couldn't defend themselves. When she threatened to expose them, she was warned to disappear. To protect her son, she left him behind, believing distance would keep him alive. But she never came back. Years passed. Rumors replaced truth. Eventually, even Dad stopped believing she had loved him. The next letters told the rest of the story. She had tried writing. Again and again. Every letter had been returned. Someone intercepted them. Someone wanted the family to believe she'd simply walked away. Michael looked up slowly. Dad never knew. I nodded. He built his whole life around a lie. Footsteps echoed above us. Heavy. Slow. The blood drained from my face. Dad. He was home. Much earlier than expected. Michael snapped off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed us. Not the prison darkness we'd known. This one carried urgency. The basement door slammed shut upstairs. Silence. Then, his voice. I know you're down there. Every word echoed through the concrete room. You've seen enough. Michael squeezed my shoulder. What do we do? I looked around desperately. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. A second staircase. Hidden behind old shelving. It climbed toward another exit. Without speaking, we moved. Every step felt impossibly loud. Behind us, Dad descended into the basement. His flashlight beam swept across the room. He wasn't angry. He looked heartbroken. You don't understand. He called softly. I was trying to protect this family. His voice cracked. They destroyed my mother. They'll destroy us too. For the first time, I realized he truly believed it. Everything. Every rule. Every sacrifice. Every year of isolation. Not because he enjoyed control. Because fear had become his entire identity. We reached the hidden door. Locked. Michael shoved. Nothing. Behind us. Footsteps grew closer. I searched the wall with frantic hands. Finally, my fingers brushed a rusted lever. I pulled. The mechanism groaned. The door burst open. Fresh night air rushed inside. We ran, not looking back. Branches whipped across our faces. Leaves crunched beneath our shoes. The cold air burned my lungs. For the first time in years, nobody was telling me where I could go. Every step felt impossible. Every step felt free. Police arrived within the hour. Not because we accused Dad. Because we handed them the basement records. Boxes. Letters. Property files. Decades of evidence. Investigators spent weeks piecing everything together. The documents uncovered a long-forgotten fraud scheme that had affected dozens of families across the county. Many of the people responsible were already gone. Others were finally held accountable. Dad wasn't arrested for the stories he'd believed. He wasn't punished for mourning his mother. He faced consequences for isolating his family, deceiving authorities, and hiding evidence instead of trusting the law. The court ordered extensive psychological treatment. Experts later concluded that years of unresolved grief had distorted his perception of reality until fear replaced reason. For the first time in decades, he began confronting the truth. Mom chose a different path. She apologized, not with speeches, not with excuses, with actions. She rebuilt relationships one conversation at a time. Healing was slow, sometimes painful. Trust didn't return overnight, but it returned, little by little. Michael finished school. Eventually he became an investigator. He often joked that he'd spent enough of his childhood surrounded by mystery to make solving them feel normal. I wasn't surprised. He'd always been the first one willing to ask questions. As for me, the hardest part wasn't learning to live in the light. It was learning that freedom isn't simply escaping a locked room. Freedom is deciding who gets to shape your future. I went back to school, made friends, learned to laugh without checking who might hear me. The world wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after years of living inside someone else's version of reality, that was enough. A few years later, I visited the old house one last time. The black plastic was gone. The windows stood open. Sunlight poured through every room. The basement had been emptied. The filing cabinets removed. The secrets finally exposed. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. For a long moment, I simply stood there, not angry, not afraid, just grateful, because the place that had once represented fear had become proof of something far more powerful. Even the darkest rooms can't keep the truth buried forever. Sometimes, all it takes is one small flashlight and someone brave enough to switch it on